Welcome to Stop the Fight. And today we're talking more boxing rumors and boxing news on the second week of May. Let's go.
Don't brag about taking my side piece. Don't brag about taking my side piece, though.
I broke my back. Back is broken. Spinal.
He's strong man, good boy, just.
All right, let's talk about Billy Joe Saunders again. I know we just spoke about him, but a lot of people really believe that he should have continued this fight with Canelo. And I'm going to take a really strong stance again, saying absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yeah, Billy Joe had said things about the boys with his Joyce fight, about how he quit. Yes, he was wrong for saying that. Billy Joe should be thankful now that he kind of paid a harsh lesson and found out himself what it's like when you break an orbital bone. He's lucky that corner pulled him out of that fight. Well, I think he wanted out himself, but there's no shame in stopping there. Your health as a human being is more important. Billy Joe Saunders is 31 years old. He's got potentially 50, 55, 60 more years to live. You have to worry about your health. Canelo is a very strong puncher. He was able to break your orbital bone. If he hits you there again, you can have permanent damage. To the fans that want to see that kind of blood, I don't know, guys, boxing is a sport. This isn't a gladiatorial death match. Yes, we love to see a little bit of blood. We like to see our fighters go through some pain, but this is different. No one wants to see a fighter permanently hurt. We can talk about the meta aspect of the CTE, and every fight is permanent injury, but there's a very big difference between knowing for sure that your fighter is going to go out and suffer potentially life-changing consequences and, just going in for a boxing fight. Billy Joe Saunders, at the end of that 8th round, and his corners understood the dangers that he was in. They did the right thing. To send him out would be neglect. It would practically be manslaughter. You know what can happen. So I do not think Billy Joe Saunders quit in the sense that we like to accuse our fighters of doing, as in like not putting in the effort, having much more to give, and choosing not to. This was not the case. There was nothing more Billy Joe could have given in that fight. His body gave out, in this case, his orbital bone, his eye socket. So he did the right thing in the corner, did the right thing, Ben Abelson, right, to pull him out. So I think we should leave it alone, and it's easy to make fun of Billy Joe after he made fun of the boys, but I think it's one of those things, like, let's hope he gets healthy. I don't personally care to see him box again. He was never entertaining, and if he's forced to retire, it'll be a shame for Billy Joe and his career, but I won't cry any crocodile tears over that, in the sense he just wasn't one of my favorite fighters, and like I said, don't care to really see him fight again, but I do wish him health. Now, let's talk about what's going on this weekend. We actually have a pretty good fight. The other Figueroa is fighting. The younger Figueroa. Brandon Figueroa is fighting Luis Nery. 2 undefeated fighters, both young, meeting early in their careers like this. You love to see it. This is going to be at Super Badminton, by the way. You love to see it. This kind of stuff, it kind of reminds me a little bit of Dimitri Pirog versus Danny Jacobs. They were both relatively young. And, of course, the HBO crew thought that, here we go, we're going to pump Danny Jacobs. It's going to be our new money-making opportunity. Didn't work out so well for them as Pirog stopped and dominated Jacobs. But, this is a fight. Luis Nery is an undefeated southpaw with good hands. He's 31-0 with 24 knockouts. And he's only 26 years old. So he is going to be fighting Brandon Figueroa, who's 21-0-1 with 16 knockouts. So both guys are indeed packing some power. Figueroa is actually pretty tall for his weight class. He's 5'9", to Nery's 5'6". He's going to be a noticeable size advantage for Figueroa. And Figueroa at 24 is still kind of filling in. Some of these kids, when you hit puberty a little later, sometimes you need 26, 27 until you really, really fill into your body. Now, if you look at pictures of Brandon, he looks like a baby. Hell, his brother looks like a baby. Omar looks like a baby, too. The first time I saw Omar fight, I was just like, whoa. I thought it was like a teenager, and the kid was 25. Brandon has a little bit of that from his brother as well. He looked very young. So I think there's some body to fill in for Figueroa. This is an orthodox with southpaw. Luis Nery's a southpaw. So again, that dynamic is in play again. I'm personally not a fan of watching an orthodox fighter fight a southpaw. I don't think it makes for good fights. I think there's always some kind of weird angle and toe issue. Everyone's always stepping on each other's feet. I don't particularly like it. I prefer two southpaws or two orthodox fighting, but I prefer young fighters fight each other as well. And this is one of those tests where both guys are kind of going to be seeing what they're made of. Figueroa drew with Julio Sea 2 years ago, actually 2 fights ago as well. And he looked like a young kid who was still learning. He was a 22-year-old kid who had that draw. We talk about Canelo. We talk about Canelo and his loss to Floyd Mayweather. Now, again, we're going to go off topic here for a little bit, but people are saying, well, wasn't Canelo in his prime at 23? He had already defeated blah, 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 and look at these other 23-year-olds. Mike Tyson was more or less beyond the peak at 23. Well, you have to understand, guys, that everyone peaks at a different time, and I think it's very evident that the Canelo that we saw fight Floyd Mayweather is not the same Canelo that we see in his past 5-6 fights. It's just not remotely the same fighter. I am in no way, shape, or form saying that Canelo would beat Floyd Mayweather in his prime, but I think it's very easy to say that that wasn't a prime Canelo. That was a very green Canelo. And by that same token, the other side is also right in saying that Floyd himself wasn't prime. He wasn't, but he was close to his prime. He wasn't that far out. It's also arguable who is the prime Floyd. Is it Pretty Boy Floyd or is it Money? Because that's a different Floyd. They fought very differently as well. Floyd at 135, 140 fights different than the Floyd at 147 and the one that, fought at 154. Those are different Floyd Mayweathers. Even Oscar, when he fought Oscar De La Hoya, which I think was his first foray into 147, that was already a different Floyd Mayweather. You can see kind of that transition, the last kind of like offensive onslaught juggernaut of a Mayweather you see against Gotti. That was really it. But like I said, I'm really going off tangent here, but Canelo was not his prime at 23 years old. He just wasn't. He was a good fighter, and there are fighters that are in their prime. Benitez, right? Benitez was hit his prime very early, and some fighters do that. But Canelo was not it. It's evident to the eyes that he's a much better fighter now. Better reflexes, better positioning, everything is better. Maybe the power is not better, maybe the power is the same. But everything else is certainly better. And hell, he places his power better now. So what I'm trying to get at here is that Figueroa scoring a draw at 22 years old against Julio Sea is not so much an indicator of Figueroa being limited as it was a young kid, a 22-year-old kid. That's still a baby in many senses who got that draw. So I wouldn't hold that draw against Brandon Figueroa. But he is up against a very serious fighter in Luis Nery. He is a very strong fighter. And he's going to put the hurt on Figueroa if Figueroa decides to engage him. He has to fight on the outside. I do not believe this is going to end well for him if he fights on the inside, especially with the southpaw orthodox dynamic. Figueroa sometimes has his chin up. And when you're a taller fighter, when you throw with your chin up against a shorter guy who's coming in on the inside, those hooking overhand rights and lefts, they land dead on. That's an easy way to get dropped. So, again, I like Nery in this fight. But, that's what my mind is telling me. But I really like Figueroa personally. I like both brothers, actually, both Figueroa brothers. And that's why I was so upset the other week by his performance, Omar's, that is. So while I'm going to be rooting for Brandon Figueroa, I think Nery is going to take this fight. And I'm going to sit this one out. I'm not betting. Nery's a minus 278 straight up, and Figueroa's a plus 200. That sounds about right. Off the top of my head, that sounds about right. I didn't give this fight much thought in that sense because, again, this is one of those fights where I think Nery is the more seasoned fighter, the stronger fighter, and I do think he's going to take this fight. So, because I want Figueroa to win, I'm going to sit this one out. Let's talk about the heavyweight, Frank Sanchez, the Cuban. Now, we've seen Frank Sanchez last week, and I didn't have a chance to speak about him because the Canelo fight obviously took precedence. Now, Frank Sanchez is a 28-year-old Cuban fighter. He was on the undercard. He fought Nagy Aguilera. He won by stoppage. More like Nagy quit. Now, he's being billed as the guy who's going to be, Cuba's next heavyweight. Great, but to tell you the truth, against Aguilera, I didn't see it from Sanchez. He's a big athletic guy, but something isn't there. It's hard for me to say, like, maybe he didn't want to be in there with Aguilera, because he sure as hell got the other guys out, Howard and Fernandez, in his last two fights. But he also had a draw against Joey Delwaco. And Joey's a pretty good fighter, so it's really not a knock that he went to the distance with him. But he's also a small fighter. If you're coming in as this killer and this new up and coming heavyweight, I thought I would see a little bit more from him. You're on the undercard of Canelo. This is a huge audience for you, and you kind of looked lackluster against Aguilera, who sure knows how to survive, but the pop wasn't quite there. He's not like a murderous puncher. He's a good puncher, but he's not a murderous puncher. He's 18-0 with 13 knockouts, about 70% knockout rate. That's an indication of a good puncher, but nothing too crazy. He's an orthodox fighter. With Cubans recently, we've seen obviously Ortiz and stuff as big, heavy fighters with good pop, but against who? What's the opposition that they're scoring these knockouts against? And this is a little bit the same thing. Like Brian Howard and Julian Fernandez, they're journeymen. You should be getting them out. And you should be getting out someone like Aguilera. I know they brought him in specifically to see how he can frustrate the Cuban Flash, Sanchez. But I think it left us more critical of Sanchez. And that's the truth. And for, there's a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but these Cuban fighters, man, they look old. Like, Sanchez looks like he's bordering 40. It's 28 years old. I'm like, holy shit. He looks like he's bordering 40. Same thing with Luis Ortiz, like 38, 37 years old. Guy looks like he's 52. He looks like he's a grandpa out there. And give him props for doing that to Wilder. Jeez. But, that's joking aside. But I'm just saying, he looks a little bit older. He looks like his body is mature. This is the kind of, at 28, sometimes they say, oh, heavyweights mature a little bit later, sometimes in their early 30s. But at 28, I think with him, what you see is what you get. And in my opinion, that's not a heavyweight champion, not in this era. Maybe sometime before, like when Vladimir Klitschko was very vulnerable, maybe in that era he can catch it. But in this era, I don't think so. That's not the kind of fighter I can see who would even get into the top 5 currently anyway. Again, it's hard to base things off of his last couple of performances because we haven't seen him in there with a real top 10 guy. And like I said, the Joey Delwaco fight was pretty good. It was a good performance on his part because Joey is a pretty good fighter. But these last 3 fights, the knockouts over Brian Howard and Julian Fernandez don't tell you much. Like I said, he's supposed to get those guys out. But the non-knockout, the kind of awkward fight against Aguilera does tell you a little bit of something. He certainly needs more seasoning. And yes, now he's in the Canelo camp or Reynoso, so things are, you expect a lot of great things, but trainers are very important in a fighter, but I feel trainers are more important mentally. They make incremental changes. And I said it with the Parker fight. It takes a while to see the changes. So we shouldn't expect something radically different from Sanchez in his next fight. A small adjustment here or there, yeah. And this is sometimes fans think, oh, the fighter got with a new trainer. It's going to be a brand new fighter. No, this does not happen. No, this takes numerous fights, numerous years. Like I said, Povetkin and Teddy Atlas. Teddy Atlas taught him how to shorten hooks over the course of like 4 or 5 fights. It doesn't take 1 or 2 fights to do it. It takes longer than that. So, recently you had Kovalev who switched trainers from Jackson to that Uzbek guy and then switched off again. Well, why did he do that? But at least because it wasn't working. But he spent 3 fights with that Uzbek trainer. 3 fights will give you a little bit of something. 1 fight, 2 fight, maybe not enough. But 3 fights, you should know. So if we don't see any kind of Canelo-isms or Reynoso-isms in Sanchez over the next 2 fights, maybe maybe the Reynoso thing is not going to work out, or at least he's not going to become a Canelo-style fighter. And again, not everyone could. Certain fighters have certain physical gifts and attributes that you can't teach. You can't turn, a short heavyweight like Povetkin into a jabber like Klitschko because he doesn't have the height or the arm length. And same thing with fighters that try to emulate Roy Jones. Very, very, very few can do so because Roy Jones has natural gifts that can't be taught. They just are. Now let's talk about the Fury-Joshua fight. We still don't have a venue. We still don't have an actual fight. We had that one poster from the Zone saying the fight is ready, but clearly it's not. But if you watched the Billy Joe Saunders Canelo card, something very interesting happened. There was a Tyson Fury interview. And if you looked at Tyson Fury looked lean. He looked lean. He looked like he was in shape. And you know what else he had? He had a black and blue under his eye. If any of you guys know anything about fighting, is that if you're sparring a lot, you get caught. And if you get caught, you get caught under your eye sometimes. If you get caught under your eye, you catch a black and blue. And Tyson Fury is very clearly training for a fight. And he's training legit. So all of this chatter a few months ago about, I'm beating my meat off, I'm drinking 13 beers a day, nonsense. This man is clearly training. Very much so. Very seriously as well. Walking around lean the way that he looked. The nice shiner under his eye. Something is happening. I don't know. I'm not sure if we're going to get a fight announced soon, but I think we most certainly are. Because Tyson Fury would not be walking around with black and blue under his eye. Guys like Tyson Fury, they're not particular gym rats. Like someone like Floyd, Bernard Hopkins, like they were gym rats. They're just like, Bernard Hopkins retired 3 or 4 times, and every single time the next day he just came back in the gym. He wasn't retired until Joe Smith Jr. literally forced him out of the ring. Some fighters are true gym rats. Tyson Fury has proven himself not to be a true gym rat. He'll work out at home. He had some of those Instagram videos working out with his wife, but he's not really a gym rat like that. So to see him with a shiner under his eye, looking fit as he does, tells me that they are close to a deal, and probably with Joshua, of course. I don't think it's going to be Wilder 3. Wilder has kept pretty quiet, hasn't mentioned much, and the news media is silent on him. So on the converse side, you have Joshua and the talks of a potential Fury fight all over the press, and that's what you need to build up the hype to sell millions of pay-per-views and make everyone filthy rich. So if I take a guess, that fight is going to get announced shortly. That's just my guess on it. And let's talk a little about this network stuff. So, the rumors of Al Heyman's demise, I think, are a bit premature, but it does seem like DAZN for the 21st century, for the year 2021, DAZN has the best model if you're a boxing fan. Obviously I'm not a paid employee of DAZN or anything like that, but in terms of a consumer, I pay $100 a year and I get all these fights. Are you kidding me? And I love the cars. My only complaining with DAZN would be that Chris Mannix and Sergio Mora sometimes bicker amongst each other rather than call the fight too much. And that really does get annoying because they seem significantly less professional than the other networks. Now, I'm not saying you have to be HBO or Showtime, but you guys are falling behind ESPN, and it's amateur hour. It really is amateur hour. You guys need to call the fights. Less of the personal stuff. Nobody knows who Chris Mannix is. Sergio Mora does a good job trying to talk about the fights, but sometimes he needs to, if Chris Mannix is saying something to you, Sergio, stop talking back to him about it. Just call the fights. But outside of that, I think DAZN, the way that, it seemed like it was all doom and gloom when they first ended the contract with Canelo and Golden Boy, but boom, Eddie Hearn and DAZN have proved themselves to be savvy businessmen and were able to renegotiate the contract for Canelo to get fights on there. And it's been working out phenomenally. I would love to see. I think they're going to get Plant as well. Very clearly, Plant doesn't need to be fighting on Fox at 11 o'clock at night against nobody. He didn't fight nobody, actually. Caleb Truau is a legit fighter. But I don't know if anyone saw that fight. And I think the DAZN's going to outbid Fox. I think Caleb Plant wants to fight with Canelo. He seemed like a level-headed dude. He knows where the money is. You know, some of these fighters, they think that they deserve more money. Like, they're literally like Butte, at super middleweight, thought for the longest time that he was a shit. It was like literally who. And when he finally stepped up against Froch, he got knocked the fuck out. And honestly, I felt like he deserved it almost. Talking shit while the Super 6 was going on. The Super 6 is one of the best tournaments for boxing. I love that tournament. Against such a loaded division, Andre Ward came out a pound-for-pound king. It's simply because you had an insanely stacked 168, and everyone was over there. Kessler, Froch, Abraham, Durrell, Alan Green, Taylor. Like those names at the time, those were like the best guys at between 160 and 175, pretty much. And when Andre Ward came out of there, boom, he was pound-for-pound number one. And I'm happy that they do that. The World Series of Boxing kind of does that with cruiserweights, and that's why Usyk came out a champ. But that's how it works. And I loved what Showtime did, showing that. That was, I was still kind of relatively young, still kind of getting into boxing. That was 11 years ago now, 12 years ago now or so. I was still kind of a new fan at that point, but I thought that tournament for me, like, it's what boxing is about. It was like the best fighting the best, and then at the end there was no question. And now comes Butte, after talking so much shit, not being in the tournament, only to get knocked out by Froch the way he did it. So going back to Caleb Plant, I think Plant with the way it's set up, I think Plant knows what he's worth relative to Canelo. Everyone does. Everyone's gonna take whatever Canelo says. So if the Zone says let's get it back on the Zone, people like it. The numbers are blowing up. Shit, I'm happy for the Zone. I'm happy for Canelo. I'm happy for Plant. I'm hoping everyone gets paid. And so that's going to do it for me today, guys. A little bit of a shorter episode. Next week, the post-fight is going to be a little bit delayed. I'm going to be gone for a little bit, so you may get it on a Tuesday or maybe as late as a Wednesday. But like I said, wait for it. It's over.
I'm gonna go home and break my wife's hip.
Don't brag about taking my side piece. Don't brag about taking my side piece, though.
I broke my back. Back is broken. Spinal.
He's strong man, good boy.